Okay, so hello to everyone who has come along to this webinar on revalidation and locum advice. So this webinar is hosted by Revise Pharma and it's in collaboration with Melissa Dajgal, who has her own Instagram page as well, which is Mel's Medicines. So make sure to give that a follow. This lecture is sponsored by Team Locum, who's an amazing locuming agency, and we'll get some more details about that later. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the revalidation process. For this part, I'm going to hand it over to Melissa, who'll introduce herself and then go through that. I will then go over the locuming bit, and at the end, we'll have like Q&A. We'll have a Q&A bit after the revalidation bit as well. But if you didn't manage to get your questions answered in that Q&A bit, then you can ask at the end as well. Right, so over to you, Melissa.
Perfect, thank you for that. Hi guys, so for anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Melissa. I was a community pharmacist for about 3.5 years. I've recently moved into the PCN land, currently in my second day, so very new. But yes, so I've been qualified for about 3.5 years, so I'm very familiar with the revalidation process. So what I'll do today is give you a brief sort of overview, talk about why we do the revalidation process, and how to submit it, and a few common questions, and how at the end I'll give you a little opportunity to ask any questions live. But if you have any questions sort of that you think of while I'm talking, please feel free to pop them in the chat. So I guess I'll go ahead. So the first thing is, why do we do it? What is the purpose of revalidation? The main reason why the GPhC asks us to do the revalidation process is to ensure that the trust the public have in pharmacy professionals is rightly held. So when I talk about pharmacy professionals, we're referring to pharmacists and pharmacy technicians, for anyone who doesn't know. Revalidation allows us to keep our skills and our knowledge up to date, reflect and improve on our practice, document how we provide safe and effective care measured against the standards for pharmacy professionals. It also builds on what we do as part of our development to ensure that we remain fit to practice and enhancing our clinical and practical skill sets. Revalidation focuses the people using the services that pharmacies provide, i.e., how did the learning point improve outcomes for, say, your patient? It's important to note that the wording is people using your services rather than patients per se, as not all pharmacy professionals directly interact with patients. So this term includes patients, their families, carers, healthcare professionals, other colleagues, students, trainees, and other organizations. So I'm going to go through how you actually submit your records. You do this through the My GPhC online portal, which you should already have an account with. So it's the same account. You can either make records directly in the portal, or you can create those records elsewhere and upload them onto the portal, whichever you prefer. You can renew your registration right there and then and submit the records at the same time. The GPhC may check that they are the right number and type of records, and yours might be selected for a review. If you are selected for a review, you'll be informed and you will receive feedback on that. If you can't, for any reason, submit all of the records, sorry, next slide, you must inform the GPhC at the point of renewal or before, and provide evidence as to why. So the GPhC will then decide whether to give you an extension or not, but you will need to make sure that you inform them before the point of renewal, not afterwards. Next slide, thank you. So records will be majority of records will be submitted electronically, and the presumption is that you will be submitting them electronically unless you have personal circumstances that don't allow you to either access online records, in which case you must inform the GPhC. Then they will let you know if you can submit them via paper records. So the next slide will go through recording. So each year you'll need to give 4 CPD entries. At least 2 of those will be planned. We'll go through what each of these actually mean in a few slides. But 4 CPD entries, 2 planned, 1 peer discussion, and 1 reflective account. So that is your whole revalidation. And the next slide will go on to what the actual, we need to make sure that no patient identifiable details should be included in any records. You can generally talk about how you think your activity has benefited the people using your services, but no confidential information, really important. So next slide will go into the difference between planned and unplanned CPDs. So for planned CPDs, you decide what it is that you want to develop, what knowledge, what skills, what you think that you need to work on, and how that will benefit your patients. For unplanned, that is essentially something that you never planned to learn, but you did anyway as a result of, say, your daily part of working, whether that's through talking with a colleague or another healthcare professional. It's something that you didn't set out to plan, essentially, to learn. So next slide. The GPhC asks you to give a real example of how the learning has benefited the people using your services. They want to hear about the benefits for the people using your services using real rather than hypothetical examples. In some cases, recording may involve more than one stage. You may start an entry and then return to it later after the learning has been applied. So next slide. Across the 4 entries, you should try and aim to learn using a variety of different methods. The GPhC want to see the relevance and the breadth of your learning and development activities, and the methods you should use should be varied depending on what you're learning. And the next slide will go into your learning should also reflect the context of your practice. So whichever role you primarily specialize in, they want to see that reflected in your revalidation records and your CPDs. You should use 4 entries to reflect that breadth, essentially. So if you have multiple roles, if, say, for example, you do half of your time in community and half of your time in a GP practice, they want to see probably 2 records of community, 2 records GP, so evenly split. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was all about the CPD. The next slide, this is now moving on to peer discussion. Peer discussions are a learning activity in which you will engage with others in reflecting on your practice. Research shows that having another person's view can help pharmacy professionals to reflect on their practice, and it can also reduce the potential for professional isolation. So essentially what they're asking is, you will be sort of interacting with another team member, and you'll be having a chat, a discussion as to how you can better your service. What can you do to improve your skills in order to improve the service that you provide? Next slide, please. So the most important thing is to ensure that your discussions are open and honest. to be the most effective, the discussions should be designed to aid your development, being open and honest with someone you trust and respect in order for you to get the most out of it. And the next slide, please. Peer discussions don't necessarily need to be face-to-face. They can take place over the phone, via web chat or video call. You'll probably be used to all of this after the COVID-19 pandemic. So yeah, they don't need to be face-to-face if that's what you were thinking. They can take place over the phone. You just need to make sure that obviously it takes place and you've got a record of it. But it doesn't need to be face-to-face. So the next thing is, how do I decide on who to pick? There are different types of peer discussions, and only you can decide which will be the best and what will be the most beneficial to you. Again, it doesn't necessarily need to be another pharmacist, but it can be, for example, a trusted colleague, a line manager, another health and social care professional, a mentor or a coach. But the majority, the most effective peer relationship will be with another pharmacy professional. But if you decide to choose outside of this, that's okay. They may bring a new perspective in your work, which could benefit the people using your services. Your peer should be someone who understands the work that you do and someone you can respect and trust. To ensure complete fairness and objectivity, there are certain people who would not be able to act as a peer. So this includes people like family members or anyone who may cause a conflict of interest. You'll be asked to declare this upon renewal. Some people might find it difficult to find a peer. Some potential solutions could be finding your peers through either your employer, potentially an education and training provider, potentially your professional bodies, so that would be the RPS, or professional associations such as the PDA, or any local networks may help you find that through as well. These are just some ideas. And the next slide will go through some discussion ideas. It's really important to note that it's not an assessment. You're not there to be assessed or be critiqued in any way. It is a discussion that should benefit you and that should enable you to reflect on your practice. And these are just some examples that you may want to use. You may not, you may think of your own, but these are just some examples that that have been used in the past and that have worked successfully. So the next slide. So you don't need to submit any information on the subjects discussed. So essentially, you don't need to, in your submissions, you don't need to write every single detail of what has been discussed. You just need to make sure that the discussion has taken place. And the idea is to aid your reflection. Your peer may ask you questions about you and your practice and help draw out reflections that you may not have reached on your own. But you don't need to submit the details of that. All you submit is who that person was, and maybe their job title as well. Next slide, please. So if you are selected for a review, the GPhC will contact your peer to confirm that the discussion has taken place. They will not ask your peer for any information about the discussion other than to confirm that it has happened. And that's why that you must make sure that your peer has agreed to be named in the record of your discussion and be happy to be contacted about it by the GPhC. Obviously, not everybody will get selected for review, so this won't happen to everyone, but it's just to give them some awareness that they may be contacted if you are selected. Next slide, please. So your reflective account encourages you to think about how you meet the GPhC standards for pharmacy professionals. And in a few slides, I'll give you some examples of what those professional standards are, but they're all available on the GPhC website, and also the RPS website have their resource as well. Your reflective account will be a summary of your practice for the entire year. So essentially, if you go into the next slide, sorry, it's the last year. You can talk about lots of different things that you may have done in the last sort of years, for example, over the course of the pandemic, and you can talk about how, for example, you've risen to the challenge, how you've improved your practice, how you could improve it in the future, things that have gone well, things that maybe you need to work on. Essentially, it's just a way for you to really think about the things that have gone well and how you can better your practice for the future. So that should, ideally, they want you to include at least one, but ideally more examples to support your account. Next slide, please, so that they can see how you've reflected on the standards and their application in the practice. So there are a couple of examples on the next slide that will just give you some idea of what it is that they'll be selecting. These are the examples that we got last year, and you won't be asked to give an example of every single professional standard. We got given 3 last year. I think it is between 1 to 3, but these are the 3 that we got given last year. So the first one was pharmacy professionals must communicate effectively. The second one was pharmacy professionals must behave professionally. And the third one was pharmacy professionals must demonstrate leadership. So those are the standards that we got last year. They may stay the same, they may change. It is likely that they will change. But it's just to give you an idea of what it is that they'll be asking for. They will give you these standards and you can apply what you've learned to those standards, if that makes sense. Okay, next slide, please. So you should include the settings of your practice. So what type of sector do you specialize in? What's your daily duties? What are you responsible for? What do you report on? What are the typical users of your service? Who are these people and how can they benefit from your service and your learnings? And these are just a few revalidation resources that I found really helpful. So these are all available on the GPhC website. The first one is the revalidation framework. If you haven't already, make sure you do have a read of that. It gives you lots of information as to what to expect, what to include. It answered many of my questions. So if you have any main questions, that they may be answered in that framework. It's just a PDF download. You can do that on the website. And then the second one is the standards that we spoke about earlier. Those 3 were the ones that I got picked last year. But, it's a good idea to make sure that you probably are already aware of what they all are, but it's just a good idea just to have a refresh of that as well. And I wasn't aware of this, but there are plenty of real examples of revalidation records on the GPhC website. So if you haven't checked that out, make sure you do, because it gives you an idea of how exactly to set it out. And it gives you an example of each revalidation point. So whether that's CPD, reflective account or peer discussion, and what they're essentially looking for. So that's a good one to look into if you haven't already. Next slide, please. So yes, so there have been, obviously with the pandemic, has been changes to many things, and one of those has been the revalidation process. So when I first qualified, I had to do the full revalidation framework. So that was the 4 CPDs, peer review, and also the reflective account. But over the last 2 years, in order to help pharmacy professionals, the GPhC have actually reduced the workload to help us, as we have obviously been so busy and trying to up our game in terms of helping our patients. And so what they're asking us to do over the last 2 years was just one reflective account. So I didn't need to do anything else. It was just one reflective account, and that was across the board. And they have confirmed that pharmacy professionals who have a registration renewal deadline on or before the 31st of May 2022, so that should be the majority, will only need to submit one reflective account when they renew their registration. They will not need to submit the other 5 revalidation records. So that has been confirmed. If I go on to the next slide, sorry, it's just to give you an idea that if that does change, the GPhC will give a minimum of 3 months notice of when full revalidation requirements will be reintroduced. So please don't stress thinking that, oh my God, like when will I need to do, like I'll have no time to do all the work. I will say not to leave it to the last minute, but they will give you 3 months notice if and when they do confirm those changes back to the original 6 revalidation records altogether. So at the moment, as it stands, there is only one reflective account until further notice. So watch the space. Anyone has any questions? Yes, so just to confirm, for peer discussion, it's literally a sentence stating the name and role confirmation. Exactly. There's nothing, obviously the peer discussion itself is a full discussion, but the submission is just the name of the person and their job title and the confirmation, probably the date and the time as well. And that's it. Yeah, you don't need to submit any other details. When will the GPhC let you know which standards to reflect? So they should let you know upon when they send you an email of when your registration renewal is due. That's when they should let you know. But bear with me, because that might change, because I think that, yeah, I'll get back to you on that one. Any other questions? Yes, this webinar is being recorded. So we'll send it to you either in your email, or I think we discussed possibly a YouTube upload as well. Can you have an unsatisfactory submission? Probably yes. If you are selected for review, or if, say, you've submitted the wrong number of records, or yeah, if you don't submit the right number of records, then that would be an unsatisfactory submission. But I haven't heard of anybody. I wouldn't worry about that. I don't think that would be a common theme, as long as you cover all bases in terms of just the main things that I've mentioned here. I think, yeah, you don't need to worry about that. As long as you cover the right records, you make sure that you have, you're doing what you need to do, and they'll give you what the standards that you need to do. So for example, if you don't cover the standards that they're asking for, potentially that could be an unsatisfactory submission. But if you do what they ask for, no, you'll be absolutely fine. Are we having a chat about locum? Yes, yes, you will be. And he'll take over from me whenever you're ready. Are we all done with the questions? I think we are.
Yeah, so I mean, even if we're not done with the questions, there will be an opportunity at the end as a whole collaborative Q&A section.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so no worries if you didn't get to ask your questions. But Melissa, thank you so much for kind of giving that speech about revalidation.
Thank you for listening. I was speaking a lot, so
no, that was perfect. That was perfect. So yeah, now basically going, I think what we'll do is we'll go on to the locum kind of aspect. So I am going to basically give you just like a brief overview on the perks of locuming, what kind of things you need to be thinking about if you're starting locuming. And yeah, just if you've got any questions afterwards as well, I'll be very happy to kind of like answer your questions if it's within my remit. Obviously, I can only give you some tips when it comes to stuff like accounting and HMRC stuff, like a very brief and general insight into that, because, well, I'm a pharmacist, not an accountant, I suppose. So those are the kind of people you need to be getting in contact with for deeper questions. So really quickly, some main points that would be interesting to go over. If you're a locum, you are acting as self-employed. Some of you might want to be a limited company. That's your own personal decision. Again, I can't really advise you on which one's best for you. Me personally, I locum as self-employed. And what that basically means is registering with HMRC as self-employed, and then filing tax returns. So you've got to be in charge of your taxes at the end of the year. When I say at the end of the year, for those who don't know, your annual the annual tax year goes from around the start of April. So I remember last year it was like after the bank holiday of April. I'm not too sure when it is this year. So it goes from April to April. So for example, we are coming to the end of the tax year 2021/2022. Now, you don't have to pay tax straight away at the end of April 2022. What the HMRC then gives you is until the end of January to file your tax returns and to pay the tax which is due. So that's what I do anyway. And if you were interested in becoming like either a limited company or self-employed, it might be a good idea to get in contact with an accountant. I personally do my self-assessment as self-employed myself. It is reasonably easy. It's not that hard. But the only reason why I do say it's not that hard for someone like myself is because I was keeping track of expenses. I was printing out invoices, and I was basically very organized with my expenses and income. So that makes it a lot easier. And I'll get onto that in a second, why you should be more organized. You are responsible for invoicing places that you work. So it might be a good idea to have an invoice template. For those who don't have an invoice template, I will basically send out an invoice template attached to the email after the webinar. And again, in compliance with a HMRC, I can't emphasize that enough. Go onto the HMRC website, see what you are allowed to expense. And if you have spent money, for example, driving from, I don't know, I live in Croydon. So if I do like a long drive to like Kent to do a locum shift, you are allowed to expense mileage. I think it's something like 45p per mile or something. But again, I'm not advising any tax advice. Like, you've got to check this for yourself. And yeah, like don't have a read through basically what you are allowed to expense. And if you've paid for something which you are allowed to expense, then expense it, because at the end of the day, you're allowed to. When it gets onto organization, I personally use Excel. You don't have to use Excel. I know some people who do it pen and paper, they print out like a little chart of their incoming and outgoing, but you need an organization system. By that, I mean just like keeping track. So every time you have an outgoing, print out like the receipt or something and write it in, for example, an Excel. And every time you have an invoice, which is paid, which is great, but you've got to keep on track of that as well. And as I said, it's a lot better for you to do it as you're going along rather than getting to the end of the annual tax year and then going, oh no, I can't remember if I spent this much money on that, or I can't even remember, oh, did that company even pay me for this invoice? I can't remember. So it's very, very important that you do keep on top of your invoices as well, chasing up companies for the invoice payment. As well as that, organize some downtime, because I know, especially if they're offering good rates, it is addictive to carry on working for those good rates. But do organize some downtime and enjoy your life whilst you still can. One thing I would say before booking on shifts, so these are for the newer people as well, especially know your worth. Don't undersell yourself, and be professional when you're kind of like asking for rates. Don't be shy to negotiate, because you can negotiate. If you feel like you're adding more value to the pharmacy, then you've got every right to negotiate what you feel like you should be being paid. As well as that, don't go in blind. Look at what all the other rates are offering, and see like what other companies are kind of offering before you kind of accept other stuff. So one thing that people might be worried about is kind of like, sorry. So one thing that I kind of was hesitant about before locuming is like using new PMR systems. So in terms of when it came to new PMR systems, I was actually quite hesitant to, for example, work for Boots, because I wasn't confident working with Columbus. So the only way you can really get around that is ideally call them before you get there. Make sure that there is someone competent there that can use the PMR system, like be it a dispenser. And basically when you get there, just learn how to use it as quick as you can. And then that way you're not blocking yourself off from, okay, well, I've never learned how to use Columbus, so I can never work for Boots. If you get into that mindset, you are basically kind of limiting yourself. And then set a good example. So this is really important. I've heard like unfortunate stories where locum pharmacists have demanded a reasonable rate, and then basically gone and basically sat in the consultation room. You don't want to be that person that brings the reputation of locums down, and you don't want to bring your own reputation down. So it's better for your own employment as well. Bear in mind, all these companies, they do keep record of who was a good locum pharmacist, who wasn't, and they'll bear that in mind for when you do go back and negotiate. If you weren't as helpful as they would have hoped to, then just remember they'll bear that in mind when you do go back to negotiate. So this webinar was sponsored by Team Locum. For those who haven't actually yet looked into locuming yet, or you are a locum but you haven't used Team Locum as an agency, they are one of the biggest in the UK. They deal with all like the major clients, Boots, Lloyds, all the big companies, as well as the small independents, and they are very well trusted across the UK. Now there's like a lot of placements open for locums. So if you do want to get into locuming, now is like the best time to basically get into locuming. And it doesn't cost anything to set up an account with Locate Locum. So they're more than just an app. They offer really, really good aftercare. When it comes to payment queries, so if you haven't been paid, They have people who will basically help you get in contact with the company to basically get your invoice paid off. And yeah, they always help you with upcoming shifts. And as well as that, if you're unsure what accreditations you need to work with, like for example, for Boots, they have their own standards. For Lloyd's, they have their own standards. They'll basically tell you which accreditations you'll need. And they've been around for 20 years, so they're really, really well experienced. When it comes to negotiation, you can still negotiate through Team Locum. They actually have their own like negotiating consultants who basically strive to get the rate that you want. And yeah, when applying for shifts, you still have the option to negotiate rates, and you can also negotiate added extras. And then the consultants who negotiate for you will take it directly to the client. And they're always around, well, between 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. That's good enough. 365 days a year, they're around to basically pick up the phone if you need help, if there's a problem on a locum shift, or if you do just want to get in contact with them for a locum shift, they're always on call, basically 7 a.m., 10 p.m., 365 days a year. And it's not just locum work that they help you with. If you do want to just settle down into a permanent job, they can basically get you in contact with some of their trained recruitment consultants and basically work out what kind of roles are best for you, depending on location, your schedule, and yeah, your general work availability. So I will be mailing out the details after the webinar in terms of how to get in touch with Team Locum. I'm sure if you just Google Team Locum, you can basically get onto their website. It's www.teamlocum.co.uk either way. And yeah, so that was that part. That's basically the whole lecture. Well, don't want to call it a lecture, it's a webinar. So if you have any further questions, whether it's on locum advice or whether it's on revalidation, we're happy to take them now. So I'm going to quickly stop recording.